Part 1. A pair of human shapes sprinted through the forest. They were vampire brides, Shaltyr's minions cum concubines. The two of them ran at breakneck speeds along the beast paths of the forest, as though they were trying to cut through the vegetation. The terrain was atrocious, with branches and twigs jutting out from all sides. However, their dresses were not damaged in the slightest, and the high heels they wore easily pushed them over the terrible footing as they forged ever onward. The leading vampire bride carefully cradled Shaltyr, while the one behind her dragged something which looked like a dried-out log. They were not far from the place where they had parted ways with Sebas. Since they had no maps or the like, they had no idea how far they were from their destination, save that they would probably have to run a long way. However, the clanging of hard metal rang through the air, and the lead vampire bride immediately ground to a halt. As the beast path was narrow, once the person in front stopped, the person behind had to do so as well. "Why did you stop?" Just as the vampire bride in front was about to answer the question that had come from behind, she shuddered as the mistress she was holding fixed her with a cold glare. Pearls of cold sweat bloomed on her back, because she was deeply aware that her mistress was not a kind or merciful person. Shaltyr, who was lounging in the vampire bride's arms, in other words, in a princess carry position, stretched her legs in annoyance. The vampire bride sensed what that meant and released her. As though escaping from a cage, Shaltyr somersaulted out. With a dexterous leap, she leapt into the air, and her high-heeled feet trod the ground beneath her. The dress she wore cascaded down to cover her legs. Once on the ground, Shaltyr flipped her hair in irritation and cricked her neck. The vampire brides could not help but gulp as they noticed the frigid look in Shaltyr's eyes. What's going on here? The reason Shaltyr was not running in the forest was because she felt it was a bother, and because she did not want to dirty her shoes. There was another reason for that, but nobody here would speak it, or even think of doing so. Even in Nazarick, only a few people would dare bring it up to her face. Since they were now transportation tools, the vampire brides could not stop without instructions from Shaltyr. She had no use for legs which moved on their own. Depending on the reason that they disobeyed her commands, they might end up suffering terribly. That was the message which Shaltyr's eyes carried. No, it would be a mercy if pain was all that awaited them. There was murderous intent in her previous question. In the great tomb of Nazarick, the lives and deaths of everyone other than the NPCs created by the 41 Supreme Beings were at the disposal of the relevant floor and area guardians. If they continued annoying Shaltyr, they might be executed on the spot. Knowing this, the vampire bride, who had the feeling that this might be her last will and testament, nervously began to speak. "Forgive me, but I stepped into a bear trap." Shaltyr looked down, and saw that the jaws of a crude metal trap had snapped shut around the vampire bride's slender leg. This was not a trap designed to deal with human beings, but wild bears, which were mighty and tough creatures. It could easily shatter the ankles of any human, even one wearing greaves, who stepped into it. Of course, vampire brides were very different from human beings. Even when pierced by the bear trap spikes, which were used to hobble animals, the vampire bride did not feel any pain or suffer broken bones. She did not appear to have been hurt at all. Vampire brides could resist damage from just about any physical damage apart from that inflicted by weapons made of silver or certain other special materials, or magic weapons bearing specific enchantments. Fortified with this damage reduction, there was no way that a simple steel bear trap could possibly injure her. Still, while she was immune to its damage, the bear trap had fulfilled its other purpose of impeding their movement. Since the trap was not coated in poison, it was clear that it was not intended to kill its prey. Its purpose was to impede its targets, slowing the opposition down by forcing them to deal with a casualty burden. Shaltyr remained silent, but shook her head as though to say, "It can't be helped." "Get out of it, then." "Yes." At once. Upon hearing Shaltyr's command, the vampire bride reached out with her slender hands and promptly pulled apart the jaws of the trap. Unable to resist a strength which exceeded that of a bear, the trap gave its prey up. The sight of a beautiful girl prying open a bear trap seemed surreal, but anyone who knew the strength of a vampire bride would not find it strange. Still, the fact that there's a trap here suggests we're close to our destination. I thought we were still quite far away. Yes, please wait a moment. Following that, the vampire bride at the rear dumped the log-like object she was carrying on the ground. It was a human corpse, desiccated and mummified. However, she had not been carrying an ordinary cadaver. It possessed a false life, which it showed as it stirred into stiff activity. Its arms resembled withered branches sprouting sharp claws, and points of crimson light glowed in its empty eye sockets, like a vampire's. Abnormally sharp canines gleamed within its half-open mouth. This was a monster called a lesser vampire. It was all that remained of the bandit, who had been exsanguinated by the vampire brides. Tell me, are we close to your hideout? The lesser vampire nodded deeply to its mistress, making a sound that was somewhere between a groan and a moan. He says so, Shaltir-sama. Is that so? Then why are there no link traps? This should not have been all. There ought to have been noisemakers and backup traps to go with them. However, they had not spotted any such traps. Shaltir looked around, probably checking to see if anyone was hiding nearby. The vampire brides began a visual search as well, until their mistress shook their head to indicate that they should stop. Well, forget it. It's not like you have any detection abilities anyway. As they heard those mumbled words, the vampire brides realized why they had been forgiven. The vampire brides, their mistress included, did not possess any trap-finding skills, which was why they had been allowed to live after failing to detect the bear trap. Perhaps their mistress felt that it was illogical to mete out punishment for failing to do something they could not have succeeded at in the first place. If I'd known, I would have borrowed that girl for this. Solution had levels in assassin-type classes, and with her thief skills she could have easily discovered those traps. Meh, there's no point griping about something you don't have. Then, let's hurry up to the bandit's lair. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. Soon, they had reached the Sellswords' hideout. Though they were still in the forest, the trees were growing thin, and beyond this place there were no more trees, only an overgrown field littered with rocks. This terrain was known as a karst. There was a large hole in the center of a bowl-like depression, from which faint rays of light streamed out. Judging by the angle of the light, there must be a sloping path leading downward. There were two shapes near the cave entrance. It was evident at a glance that they had been deliberately positioned there. They were round wooden barricades reaching up to the height of a man's belly, though they were otherwise unremarkable. They were little more than a pile of wooden logs, but there was a sentry on each side. It would seem the intention was to use the logs as cover from ranged attacks, so they could protect themselves if the enemy fired on them with bows and get inside to warn their comrades. Under normal circumstances, launching a frontal attack from this distance would allow the bandits to prepare their weapons and send reinforcements from the cave. Also, all the rocks which were big enough for intruders to hide behind had already been moved away, in order to prevent a stealth approach. In addition, there were large bells on the sentries' shoulders. Even if they were somehow downed by a sneak attack, the sound of the bells would alert their friends to the presence of enemies. One could say that it was quite well thought out. This situation was insoluble by purely physical means, but there was a way past it. That was by using magic. After casting a silence spell, the attackers could kill them all in one go. Alternatively, they could use invisibility to hide their approach, or charm person to draw out the opposition. Destroying the bells was also an option. As Shaltir pondered which of these methods would be the most entertaining, Shaltir realized that there was an important piece of information which she did not have. Is there only one entrance? The lesser vampire nodded stiffly in response to Shaltir's question. Shaltir smiled. It would seem that there was no need to overthink this. This sturdy defense could be used to ward off ambushing enemies, or allow one man to hold off a horde. However, Shaltir and her followers were different. Charging straight in would not pose a problem to people who were so unimaginably powerful that they could crush humans like bugs. The only relevant consideration was if there was an exit through which the opposition could flee. Is that so? Then, since we've arrived, there's no need to hide in the shadows. Honestly, I'm not used to that sort of skulking around anyway. After all, anywhere you go is sure to shine brightly, Shaltir-sama. Stating the truth hardly qualifies as flattery. You'd best think harder if you want to try sucking up to me. Ignoring the vampire bride begging forgiveness, with a lowered head, Shaltir reached out and grabbed the body of the lesser vampire. I shall entrust the weighty duty of being the vanguard to you. Go, then. Her slender arms blurred, and the lesser vampire tore through the air before striking one of the sentries. Due to the spin imparted during the throw, the lesser vampire spun end over end several dozen times before hitting the man. The force of the impact beggared the imagination. Not just the sentry's head, but even his chest spurted blood in all directions. The stench of fresh gore hung in the air, and the other man could not parse what had just happened before his eyes. All he could do was stare dumbly at his colleague's tragic fate. Still, this was quite an amusing sight to the thrower. Strike truly magnificent, Shaltir-sama. The vampire brides applauded Shaltir, who was pumping an arm in victory. Needless to say, the lesser vampire had been pulverized, but the three of them did not seem troubled by that at all. That creature had never been a part of Nazarick to begin with, and had only been made for amusement. They felt nothing about how it had just been destroyed. In addition, it had originally been a human being. Shaltir did not recall what she had promised him before. Now, how about the other one? Shaltir looked between the two vampire brides. They got the message and hurriedly passed her a rock which was suitable for throwing. Yuasho, as she heard the sound of a bell from the distance, Shaltir grabbed a rock which was slightly larger than her hand. Her delicate hand moved with shocking speed. In the next moment, Shaltir observed the results in the distance and happily pronounced, "Then, that would make 2 strikes, Applause rang out once more. Then, the sound of a sentry shouting about an enemy attack reached Shaltir's ears. It would seem that another sentry had heard the sound of the bell. As she looked inside the cave, which seemed to be getting noisier and noisier, Shaltir smiled gently before ordering, "Then, let's go. You keep watch from on top of a nearby tree, and make sure nobody escapes. You take the role of the vanguard and clear a path for me. However, do tell me if you encounter anyone who's stronger than the rest. I want to play with them." "Yes, Shaltir-sama. Go." Having received her orders, the vampire bride stepped forward, slowly approaching the cave entrance, and then she vanished. The earth collapsed. No, the earth did not collapse. She had stepped into a pit trap. Perhaps Shaltir might have been able to avoid the trap before falling into it, but the vampire bride's reactions were not enough for her to evade a trap where the earth vanished under her feet. Still, the vampire bride was a low-level vassal who had no particular ability to detect traps, so there was nothing to blame her for. That was why she had been forgiven earlier. Still, even if she understood why it had happened, Shaltir still made a noise of annoyance. After that, she smiled sweetly. That was not a smile born of kindness, satisfaction, or even embarrassment. Come to think of it, she should have anticipated that they would put a pit trap in front of the cave entrance. However, it angered her that she had not seen through it, had even fallen for it. It was with a heart boiling with such emotions that she had smiled. Shaltir Bloodfallen was a guardian of the glorious great underground tomb of Nazarick. The fact that a servant of such a mighty individual had fallen for a trap like that was utterly intolerable. A voice filled with murderous intent leaked from between Shaltir's crimson lips, "Get out of there before I tear you to pieces." With a great leap, the vampire bride vaulted out of the pit and landed beside it. Though her clothes were stained by mud, there was no sign she had been hurt. "Don't disappoint me again. My deepest apologies, forget it, just get in there. Unless you want me to throw you in like that trash from just now?" As Shaltir reached out with a grabbing gesture, the vampire bride wailed in acknowledgement, and immediately rushed into the cave. Shaltir followed leisurely behind her, strolling slowly into the cave. Part 2. As the clamor from outside filtered into the private room, the hand working on a weapon paused, and a pair of ears pricked up. There was the sound of fighting, people running, and some screams mixed in. They had been attacked, but there was still no idea of the attackers' numbers and their abilities. This was in spite of being trained to loudly shout that information when an attack came. He could still hear something. This might have been a private room, but it was within a cave and had only a curtain in place of a door. The only thing separating this place from the entrance was distance, and while the curtain was thick, sound could still get in. There were close to 70 people in the mercenary band known as the Death-Spreading Brigade. They were not as strong as him, but they were still grizzled veterans. A raid by a small number of men would not cause such chaos. With that in mind, it might be reasonable to deduce that a large force had descended upon them. However, that did not explain why there was no sound of a great host outside, and the enemy did not feel that numerous. Then, could they be adventurers? That might explain this strange feeling of attackers, who were few in number, and possessed great fighting power. He slowly rose to his feet, hanging his weapon at his waist. He put on a chain shirt, which did not take much time to don. Then, he attached a leather pouch with several potion bottles to his belt and tied it in place. Since he was already wearing his enchanted necklace and rings, his preparations were now complete. He flung aside the curtain before stepping onto a central path within the cave. Countless lanterns hung at evenly spaced intervals on the walls, each glowing with a continual light spell. It was bright enough that one could scarcely believe they were in a cave. The light illuminated his entire body. He was tall, but not skinny. The body beneath his clothes was as solid as steel. He had not honed his physique through strength training, but through live battles. His hair was sloppily cut and thus looked uneven. It looked quite messy. His brown eyes stared keenly forward, and the corner of his mouth was curled up in the beginning of a sneer. His chin was overgrown with stubble that looked like mildew. Although he appeared quite slovenly, his movements were nimble and graceful, like those of a beast. As this man arrived at the entrance which was under attack, another man burst in from the other direction. He seemed quite familiar, he was a sellsword from the brigade. As the mercenary saw him, a look of triumph blossomed on his face. What happened? The enemy's attacking, Brain-san? The bitterly smiling man, Brain, responded, I know the enemy is attacking. What I want to know is how many are there? Who are they? Yes. There's 2 of them, both women. Women? Only 2 of them? Could it be Blue Rose, HM? Brain tilted his head in what seemed like puzzlement, and then he strode out toward the cave entrance, through which the clamor poured. The strongest adventurer team in the kingdom was called Blue Rose, and it was composed of 5 women. One of them had been an old lady. She and Brain had exchanged blows, and both sides had come away covered in wounds. He had also heard that the strongest assassins in the empire were apparently women. Powerful women were not exactly a rarity. Although women had weaker bodies than men, magic could easily cover that gap. And of course, if someone with powerful physical abilities was augmented with equally powerful magic, the result would be invincible. Respect welled up in Brain for these opponents, who stood as few against the many. His blood boiled in his chest, a battle lust which resembled a hunger to do battle with mighty opponents. There's no need for you to come over. Just make sure you guard the inside well. After giving the sellsword his orders, Brain strode forth, toward an unknown yet powerful foe. Diamond Suit, his full name was Brain Unglaus. Originally, he had been nothing more than an unassuming farmer. However, he was possessed of a natural gift, which was a talent for swordsmanship. With the aid of this talent, he was practically invincible as long as he had a weapon in hand. On the battlefield, he had not taken any wounds more severe than a scratch, and he could be described as a fighting genius. Having never known defeat in swordsmanship, he walked an eternal path of victory. Nobody, not even himself, had doubted this. But the kingdom's royal martial tournament had changed the course of his life. At first, he had not joined to win. He had simply intended to let the entire kingdom know of his prowess. His aim had been to leave everyone crushed at his feet. However, he could barely believe the result of that tournament. Defeat for the first time since he had picked up a weapon. No, for the first time in his life, he had been defeated. The man who defeated him was Gazef Stronov. He was now the kingdom's warrior captain, and the mightiest warrior in the surrounding nations. Before they faced each other, the two of them had swiftly cut a swathe through their respective divisions. However, the intense battle between them used up all the time they had saved. In the end, Gazef had seized victory with the move called the fourfold slash of light. The tale of that struggle was immortalized in song and story. In addition, the ascension of the low-born Gazef to the position of the warrior captain was proof of how spectacular that battle had been. Even the nobles who detested him could not dismiss him as a weakling. Though the winner was covered in glory, Brain, the loser, felt as though all his efforts up to that point had gone up in smoke. However, Brain had also learned that the dream of becoming the strongest in the world was not one that only he possessed. It would seem his perspective had been too limited. After retreating into himself for over a month, Brain broke through the despair that would drive anyone to drink and pulled himself together. He refused employment offers from several nobles, having decided for the first time in his life to strengthen himself. He trained ceaselessly, honing both his skills and his body. He learned about magic and furthered his knowledge. The genius now applied himself like a scholar. Defeat had only made Brain stronger. He did not want to work for nobles, because he did not want his talents to rot away. One needed sparring partners when practicing the martial arts. Mere discussions of theory were not enough. In addition, there were vocations that allowed him to fight often and earn a good wage. He did not choose the profitable path of the